Is that what this is, or is that someone else?
No, that's someone else.
Yeah, okay. Well, hi to whoever just logged on. We can't see that you have a name, but we're just waiting for a few more minutes. There's been some bad weather, so we want to see if people are coming here or if they want to log on. And then we'll just probably get started and record it to be able to send out to anyone who wasn't able to make it. So feel free to either put questions in the chat or you can ask questions live as well.
I'll take one more look outside.
Okay, sounds good.
If I see people.
Thanks for taking time out of your busy day to log on and interact and have some time to chat before the convention. We're grateful for that. So Kris just went to see if there's anyone coming in the parking lot, and if not, then I think we'll probably get started. Yes, I agree, Jerry. Maybe not defunding, but making some more accountability to who they decide to invite. We definitely are putting pressure on them to know that, you know, as the source of their funding, we're not thrilled with the decisions they're making right now. I don't know if you know, but the position of president is open, so that's going to be something that we're looking at in the next couple months of who would be best to take on the responsibility of being president of UVU. And we just did that at Weber State and at USU. I mean, I guess it wasn't Weber State, but it was at USU, and very happy with the new president there. So they are realizing that they need to be more accountable for the decisions and messaging that they're giving. Absolutely. I agree. I think that might go for all state agencies. They think we're here to support them, not the other way around, and that we're their bosses, and that they're using public money to do what they're doing. All right.
Drops the door opening. Somebody got rid of my sign, so.
Oh, gosh.
Just wanted to know where we were. So I'll check again in a little bit. So if you need to adjust.
Okay, sounds good. Well, do you want to get started?
Sure.
You're the one who set it up, so go ahead.
Well, thank you both for joining. I'm hoping that, I know with the roads and everything, people might either hopefully hop on Zoom or show up in a few minutes. So we'll let that go as it happens. This is a space to really ask questions, to dive in deeper into some of the topics, you know, beyond the 3 or 6 minutes that we get when we're at our convention speeches. So We can start with if there's any questions here.
Well, do you
and
want
then
to
if not, we
introduce
can-
yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I guess we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Figure we've talked with each of you, but so I'm Kris Campbell. We're both running for House District 4, so that's what we're here for, the state legislative race. I grew up in Wyoming. I've lived here for 16 years. I've got 2 daughters, ages 11 and 15. Other candidate Zooms tonight.
That's right. I did get a couple texts
That's
about
true,
that,
I
didn't
did.
I? Well, it's a
Yeah.
good thing to record it then.
It is. Yep. Yeah, we'll share this out with people. Let's see. Where was I at? Oh, good. We'll let Kent get on and then we'll keep going.
Okay. Hi, Kent. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, as a delegate myself, I've come to appreciate just the number of calls and meetings and efforts that it takes to do your research and to dig into each of the candidates. So thank you all for taking your time to do that. And I'm hoping by us being here together, it makes it easier for you to be able to learn more about both of our campaigns and help you better make a decision. Let's see. So, and I would say my main points are I'm for fair taxes, fair representation, fair processes, local control, stewarding our land, water, and air, making sure our kids can afford to live here and our grandkids can afford to live here in the future, well, or even now, right? Both housing-wise and healthcare-wise. So I'd love to dig into those topics and as well as anything else that's on your mind. And Tiara, if you want to.
Great, thanks. I'm Tiara Auxier, and I'm the current incumbent for House District 4. I took over when Kara Birkeland resigned 2 years ago. And a lot of the things that got me into politics and wanting to run is local control, especially when it comes to zoning and communities being able to decide what that looks like and not letting that power come down from the state. I don't think that we should have an all-powerful state agency that is deciding zoning across the state, because every community and every county is different, and the people who live there know best what they want that to look like and the different needs they have. So that's one of the main things that I care a lot about. I've written a lot of bills and about that topic. I'm also a tax accountant by profession, and so transparency and accountability as far as that goes with financial, just financial restraint, I guess, with spending and tax raises. I am always pushing for lowering our taxes, which we've been able to do with income tax. Property tax is way too out of control right now, and I ran a tax bill about that this year, and I passed one last year where I found some funding that wasn't going through truth in taxation and had no transparency to it, which I didn't agree with. I also have kids, and they are in public schools, and so I care a lot about what's going on in their schools. Come on in. And so I'm also on the education committee, so do a lot in that space as well. And besides that, just very conservative values. And we've just had some people come in, so we'll bring you guys in and then we'll keep chatting. Come on in. Thanks for coming. We decided to put a Zoom too because of the weather, just in case.
Yep. So, and we've got that recording, just so you know. So,
Sounds good.
Those aren't bad at all.
Not now, but they were at least an hour ago. So how was it for you driving over? Is it okay now?
Oh, just fine for Henniker.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Yeah, I had about this much snow on my truck, but
Yeah. Great.
I appreciate you joining us. So we just did a brief introduction of ourselves, and then we want to open it up to questions that people have. This is a chance to really dig into any questions or issues or topics of interest.
sounds good.
Yeah.
Did you finish your,
I'm tax accountant, lower taxes, accountability, transparency, local control, protecting agriculture, and that way of life and the values I think that stem from agriculture and having property, not necessarily having everyone in townhomes everywhere and apartment buildings. I think home ownership is super important, and so trying to find ways to make sure that our kids have access to that and we have access to that, I think is something that we're
I don't know how kids
need to
can
focus
afford
on.
it today. I
It's
couldn't
crazy.
buy my own home today.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, there's a question on here. It says, how do you each see the petition signed in the North Summit School District sending the new school bond back to the voters? And how moving forward do you see fixing the overreach with the bond process for passing those things without voter approval? Do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. So, it's interesting because this has been an ongoing issue in North Summit for a number of years. There's been a number of attempts at getting this bond passed, and I can, appreciate that there's a need to get something done with the school and to find a solution. But I think when something gets powered through and we decide to just do it anyway and ignore, the questions and concerns that people have, that ends up causing further problems down the road. So I think while it might help in the short term of finding a way to get some funding to get the project moved forward, it doesn't address the underlying issue that's causing the conflict and the concerns about the bond. So I think one of the things that's really important is that we learn how, as elected officials, to be able to talk with and listen to people's concerns and understand. One of my understandings, I haven't talked in depth with a lot of people, so I would appreciate feedback on this too, but one of my understandings is that there's a lot of expensive athletic facilities wrapped in with the high school. There's some concerns about trust about what's going to be built and whether it's going to be managed appropriately and things like that. So I think it's really important that those issues get addressed first, and be able to come up with a creative solution to navigate addressing the needs of the kids in the future with making sure that things are managed well and spent responsibly.
Yeah, and so I definitely have been aware of this and addressed this. I wrote a bill actually saying that if you have had something fail at the ballot and it needs to go to the ballot first, that you can't go around and fund it a different way. I believe in representative government, and when you've had 2 times at the ballot a bond fail, that means that your community is not interested in the price tag or the vision of whatever that is. And so I think a lot of this has to go back to being involved in our local elections, because that shows me that the school board is not listening to the constituents, and they are trying to push this through no matter what. If we look at enrollments, our enrollment is going down, our student enrollment. So why is it that we're raising, $150 million for this crazy Taj Mahal school when that's not what the needs are? And so, if it's a safety issue for an old school, have that conversation, look at creative ways to manage that when the community has said they don't want their taxes raised like that. So I don't agree with that. And, it's the same thing with property taxes. The state really doesn't have a whole lot to say as far as raising property taxes. There's a little component to it, but most of the time it is your school districts, or it's your cities or your counties. And so for your commissioners or your counselors, that means that they are not listening, and they have a spending problem because they should be able to work within the budget. They're guaranteed the same budget that they had the year before. And in fact, there's another special thing in there that any property that has increased in value gets added on automatically to the tax revenue that they're bringing in without going through tooth and taxation. So we have seen budgets ballooning year after year, and yet our school districts and our counties are saying, oh, we haven't raised your taxes. Well, it's because they're automatically raising their base every year with the new growth aspect of that. And so that's something at the local level that they need to be aware and maybe a little bit afraid of their constituents, that if they don't listen, they should be getting voted out and not getting in the first place. So
I think part of that too comes from the state level, as the state has continued to reduce the income tax and not fully fund schools, but increase the mandates on things that school districts need to do, like provide security systems to help harden our schools and keep them safe for kids. the state says the schools need to do that, but doesn't provide extra funding for schools to do that. So then school districts are put in a tough position where they need to comply with the law, and they need the funds to do it. So they end up doing things like raising property taxes and stuff. So I think sometimes it's easy for the state legislature to get all the credit for reducing the income tax and not recognize that those actions do push our property taxes back up again, because we still need some of those funding. So I think we need better coordination kind of across those, and making sure that when those mandates are given by the state, that there's funding to go along with it.
I might push back a little bit on that. With school security, and specifically, we funded $50 million for the hardening of schools. We funded more this past session as well. We put $2.5 billion of income tax into the schools in the last year. And in fact, they have an automatic increase of $350 million every year. I might disagree with how much they're actually getting every year. I think that's a lot, especially like I was saying, our enrollment is declining. So it also needs to look at where you're spending your money, not necessarily that you get the same money year over year and keep getting to grow new and more programs. You might need to prioritize, but we are definitely not underfunding schools, in my opinion. We've put billions of dollars into it in the last few years. And we have the second starting highest pay for teachers, and we pay the most out of a percentage of our state budget towards school of any state. And so I know sometimes we look at per pupil's funding, but that's different in a state that doesn't have as many kids as we do. I mean, we get a good kind of bang for our buck, and economies of scale, which I think is smart. I think we've seen in many places that throwing money at a problem doesn't necessarily change the problem. And so that I don't think we just need to spend more money. Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
As somebody who lives in the North Summit School District, I think that the biggest problem that people have is not that they want to build a new high school. It's what they want to add along with it. For example, they want a whole new football stadium, where they just spent, well, I guess it's approaching 10 years now, but they spent $4 million on the existing one to upgrade it, and it's beautiful. Okay, so I'm not sure why they want to do that, but beyond that, I think that the biggest thing that the people have that is a worry is that the fact that although there's the elected, the bond that they can get through election, there's also a second bond that they can get without no election. Yeah. And I know that as state legislatures, you really have no control over what the school board does, because they're also elected officials, and that's where we have to vote in or out. But with that said, it seems to me that there's something that maybe the state legislature could do about that loophole.
Yeah, and maybe you weren't here when I was first talking about that, but I wrote a bill about this last session to not let them do that. And the resounding feedback was, we always love to talk about local control. This is local control. And, there have been some people like having to be able to get tools that they can go around the public with. And that's unfortunate that they won't support getting rid of those. But I try to take out any sort of, public-private partnerships, stuff like that. But
yeah, it seems to me that that's it probably didn't go anywhere this year, but hopefully.
Yeah, I did prop it open. Is it okay to leave, or do you need it shut?
I can leave it if you need it. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, it's just if any more people are coming.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Can I make a comment on the state level?
Yeah.
Legislature. Last year, there was a bill. I call it a union buster bill.
Yeah.
And in committee, there was over 500 people coming. It says, we don't want it. The legislature passed it, went to the governor, signed it. So the representative says, let's do something about it. So they got a signature going, petition. It went through, and they got more signatures than what they needed to put it on the ballot. Come the special section this year, I don't know the right words.
It's kind of like rescinded.
They rescinded it.
We kind of repealed it, yeah.
Repealed. They repealed it. That's how it works on the state level. And the school should notice that too.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it works with gathering signatures, and the legislature saw what the people wanted,
Yeah.
and so they repealed.
It's true.
And that's the way this should work, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's how they've stopped the 2 other bonds, you know, by rejecting it. And so at what point do you keep making the public go over that process? You know, I think you're right. It's like, okay, you know, justify why we need a new school, and then like, let's talk about what that actually looks like.
Yeah, yeah, to me, it feels like because they had this avenue, they didn't really push for the elected bond very hard. You know, I think that they could have passed it if they had properly educated people on it and thought carefully about what exactly they were putting in it. But they didn't, because they didn't have to.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a thing where, yes, you tried to work on something this year, but I would hope that next year more people will get involved, other legislatures, to support that, because I think that we need to close that loophole.
Yeah. The same thing happened. I think it was in Box Elder last year. And so anyway, I had to bill both years. I did change it a little bit.
I think let's go to Kent's question next, since it's still talking about schools, and then we can go back and cover Jerry's question.
Okay.
So Kent asked, from the state level, what do each of you see as the biggest focus to address for Utah schools? And what are examples of things that should be handled at the local level but have been discussed at the state level? So I think one of the biggest, we talking about starting teacher pay, I think that's a huge important thing. I think one of the things that is highly correlated with student success is getting smaller class sizes. So whether that's increasing the number of teachers we have or increasing teacher aides so that we've got a better student to teacher ratio, especially when we're talking in elementary school, we'll get better outcomes. It'll help with reaching our 3rd grade literacy levels, which have been a big priority to raise up. I think one of the other things that'll help with that is continuing to allow for and fund full-time kindergarten across the state, and then starting to look at ways to get preschool. So Park City School District just started getting preschool availability, 3-year-old and up, and that makes a big difference for people that are working multiple jobs, trying to raise money, that they've got a place where they know their kids are going to get a good education, are going to get a good prep for that education, so they'll be in a good healthy space. They can start working towards that. That really sets kids up for success when we're talking about reading and academics and learning going forward. So I think really focusing on the those young ages, making sure they're well funded, and that funding is going directly into the classroom. So it's decreasing the student teacher ratio, and increasing the availability that we have.
So this is a state discussed issue that should be hired at the local level, you mean? Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, I was saying from the state level, that would be the biggest focus to address from Utah schools. And then as far as things that should be addressed at the local level, I think being able to really empower local education associations, the LEAs, the school boards, to be able to adapt to what communities need, whether that's in Rich County, for instance, they have the 4-day school week, whether that's being able to really tailor which kinds of classes are available, or how we can better partner with universities or tech schools or things like that for our high school kids. I think the state should be more about setting guidelines, and I'm also talking at the state school board level, should be more about setting guidelines and providing tools and resources, and let the LEAs make the final decisions about what needs to happen within the school districts.
Yeah. So I think one of the big things for me that I think maybe should be addressed at the state level, and it's definitely things we've talked about, but is a local control issue, is administrator pay. I think, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the reports that have come out lately about school spending, but it's, teacher salaries are like this and administration is like this, and if we're talking about wanting to focus on kids and wanting to care about their success, that money should be going into the classroom. And I know last year when we were in session, we had a budget deficit of $300 million just because of some of the stuff, the big beautiful bill and Medicaid that we had to fund here at the state. And so across the board, we needed to cut 5% of the budget in all of our different communities or committees. And the thing that we focus on most in the education committee is making sure we weren't making any cuts that affected the classroom, because we wanted to keep the money in the classroom. And I think we've all seen, and if we haven't, we should be paying attention to these school board meetings where, people are being able to retire on some sweetheart deals, making their administration pay just go up and up and up. And that's happening in all of our school districts. Are they making themselves raises? Are they giving themselves more health benefits than they had before? These are all things that I'm hearing about happening in our district, and that is a local control issue. We've talked about trying to decide, is this a state thing that we should look at and we should try to curtail? But then you have certain counties come out and say, hey, we have different needs in our school district than maybe a rural school district, and we need to pay someone in Salt Lake City more than maybe we'd need to pay someone in Juab County. But we should really be scrutinizing what our local elected officials are doing. I know sometimes it's easy to look at national politics or even state politics, but our local elected officials are making some really big decisions that affect our lives and our taxes especially. And so I think we need to be pushing back and say, I know in the COVID years, money was just flying around like crazy, but those years are over and we need to be tightening our budget. And, if there's people who continue to raise your taxes year after year or aren't actively trying to lower the budget, which they should be since they're getting more money every year anyway, we need to not keep electing them year after year, So I would say that's a big thing.
Yeah, we need to also consider how lowering the income tax again this year also contributed to needing to address education budget, right? Because because it's been lowered for a number of years, it could have stayed where it was at, and that would have been fine as well.
Well,
there seems like sometimes an interest at the state level to try to reduce the amount that's being spent on schools so that it can be spent elsewhere. And I think we need to make sure that, especially in our rural communities where we don't have a bunch of private schools, we don't have things like that. So our public schools are the things that help our kids be set up for success. I think we need to invest wisely in that future. I agree with you that funding needs to go into the classroom, not to the administrators. We need to make sure that there's enough of it because the property taxes are going up to make up for that cut in the income taxes. So
the money that's set aside for education can only be spent on education. We can't take that and spend it on anything else. Right. It is earmarked for education. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that lowering the income tax for the 6th year in a row is a bad thing and pushes anything more into public school funding with property taxes. If we eliminated income tax altogether, that might be something, but we've had citizens initiatives that have been passed in the state that say they want to use income tax for public school funding, whereas before it was solely property tax. And so, it's the same thing as, a couple of years ago, we saw opening up the income tax or using the school trust lands money to pay for different people and different groups than we had before. Originally was specifically just for schools, but now it's going towards, maybe disabled groups even after their school age and some other things. And so we also need to think about when something sounds really good on a ballot, hey, yeah, I'd love to expand Medicaid. Well, what does that actually look like at a state budget? Because it almost bankrupted Utah to expand Medicaid the way that it passed on the ballot. And luckily the legislature was able to rein it in a little bit. Otherwise, our taxes would have had to get higher and higher. And so one of the things I would love to see on a ballot is when there's any sort of initiative that's going to be taking taxpayer money is saying, where's that money going to come from? Are you going to raise taxes? Are you going to take it out of another bucket it's paying for something else? What project's going to go away to fund this? Because then the citizens say, yeah, this sounds great, but why are we being taxed so much? Well, you voted to to, you know, increase the budget of the state by, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars because he wanted to expand Medicaid. And so I think we really need to be able to see what those repercussions are.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think when I talk about especially with the income tax, I've know that there's been attempts and continue to be attempts to start to direct more of that away from, to be able to change the Constitution, amend it so that it's not being spent just on education, but so that income tax can be spent on other things. And so it's more of a what I would watch out for in the future to make sure that that doesn't happen, because I think it's important that that we make sure that we're guaranteeing that we're investing wisely in our kids' education.
Yeah, so maybe you're talking about the bill last year when they were talking about wanting to collect all the property tax at the state level and then refund it back to all of the school districts. And I actually did vote against that bill, and they were going to try to bring it back in a special session. And luckily there was enough of us that we were getting together to say, no, you know, local money is local money. It shouldn't be coming through the state. And so I think maybe that's what you're talking about, but I don't support that at all.
Awesome. Welcome, Bruce and Jerry. It's good to have you on the call. Let's see. Feel free to either ask a question or pop something in the chat. We've got a couple people live and you on Zoom. I think next we've got Jerry's question, which is illegal aliens. Dodging tough issues is not compassion, it's cowardice. 22 rhinos didn't vote to stop welfare for illegals. The recent murder where the victim was dumped in Browns Canyon was aliens. For the past 5+ years, state population growth was from both legal and illegal immigration. This adds to the housing shortage. Do you have a question in there? I guess I should have read it first before reading it. Do you have a question about that, Jerry, or do you want us to talk about immigration? Your thoughts. Okay. So I agree. It's really important. The issue of how do we make sure that we handle immigration in a way that's effective? Like, clearly our system is broken right now, and it's broken in lots of different ways. The challenge is if we only address one of those pieces without addressing everything else, then we're still end up in a mess. So we need to really look at things comprehensively, both how do we address issues with enforcing our laws, and how do we improve our system so that it works better for everybody. And what do I mean by that? You know, a couple delegates have asked me about E-Verify, for instance, and said, you know, why was this bill passed that raised the threshold from, I think it was 15 or 25 people to 250? What's going on
150?
with 150? Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. What's going on with E-Verify? Is it expensive for businesses? How does it work? And so I started digging into that a bit today, and you know, the answer is it's a complicated problem. With E-Verify, there's issues about how accurate it is, how effective it is. There's concerns about, well, the businesses that are hiring people under the table are going to still hire people under the table even if they're mandated to use E-Verify. So I think the question goes beyond, and it's tricky because it's not an easy thing, but how do we better enforce making sure that that our economy that needs labor has access to labor in a way that is legal and above board, so that people aren't feeling like they need to play games with the system to be able to hire. And that's a complicated that's a complicated situation. I think the thing is that it's really important to not just assume that if we do one thing and I don't know, say deport a bunch of people, for instance, that's going to suddenly fix all those other issues around how do we continue to make sure that we have the employees that we need to have, how to make sure that we have a good, strong running economy, how to handle, you know, addressing some reforms around temporary visas and temporary workers. For instance, in Park City, the J1 visa is like a 4-month-ish kind of visa, but the ski season, maybe not this year, but other years, is maybe 6 months. So can we better fit the seasonality of some of those visas to match what our employer needs are, and get some alignment there, so that it's easier for people to come in, work for a time, help out our economy, and then move back?
No, are those, that's more of a federal issue.
That is a federal
That's a
thing,
motion.
and you know, we see that Washington D.C. and Congress is broken. So
Terribly on
we
that.
can't wait for them before we act. I ran an E-Verify bill this year that would take the number down. Like Kris said, it was raised up to 150 employees. If you had more than that, then you'd have to use E-Verify. And I tried to reduce it this year, got all the way through into Senate committee, and had originally passed Senate committee 4-3, and then when one of the senators realized it was going to pass, switched their vote, so then it failed 3-4. The main feedback and the only people who came and spoke to that was the construction industry. And, you know, I don't think it's a good look to say, hey, we need all this illegal labor. It's obviously not fair to the people who, you know, some of these same immigrant groups came here legally and they started their own subcontracting business, and yet, you know, they're being undercut by the same people who came here illegally from their communities. And I don't think that's right. I think we need to protect the businesses here and the people here who are doing things the right way. I think also when we talk about what we can do at the state level, I don't know how much you guys know about ICE and the different facilities they have, but we only have one ICE facility that we share with like 6 different states, and that's in Nevada. So when we would have police come and arrest someone who we knew was illegal, ICE would have 48 hours to come get them. And if they did not come get them, then our law enforcement would have to release them. And during certain administrations, that reaction is different. And many times they would just not show up, and we wouldn't be able to have the space to keep them. The requirements to keep an illegal immigrant is very different than a U.S. citizen. And the conditions that U.S. citizens get are not as good as what ICE and the administration, the Biden administration, was saying that they needed to be. So we've had representatives working on that to try to open up new centers. And so we see this one in West Valley going in, and you know, you see people protesting. But the reason why is because we have hundreds, if not thousands, of people being arrested all the time that we cannot keep in our own jails. Even if we had the space, which we don't, because we're having to release our own multiple violation offenders back onto the streets because we don't have enough room. When the prison was relocated and built again, they made it even smaller than the original one in Draper. But we have put funding aside to fund a new one in Gunnison so that we have more beds to make sure we're keeping criminals off the street. And I know the ICE arrests that were going on in different states and even here in Utah, people get really upset about. But if we actually had the ability to process people through who got arrested and put in our jails, and then they went smoothly to an ICE center, like that is what law enforcement is supposed to look like. And so I'm wholly supportive of that.
I have a question. I had a very personal experience last month with the ER at the University of Utah. My daughter was very sick. The urgent care had sent us down for suspicion of sepsis. And because they phoned that in, it was lucky for us because when we walked in there, I had never seen it so crowded in my life.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. I mean, there were people standing because there weren't enough seats. And they were able to triage my daughter and get her help for what they needed. But as it turned out, a huge chunk of the people that were there weren't there for emergency purposes. That the emergency room has become the regular doctor's office for people who are undocumented for the most part and don't have, and of course, obviously, then don't have insurance. And they go there because they can get free care. Now, I understand the humanitarian need to take care of life-threatening situations for anyone, regardless of where they're from. But what about help for people that just want some medication?
I agree.
Yeah, and it's, you know, our healthcare system has gotten ridiculously complex, right? In that you need to have insurance, and depending on what insurance you have and whether you have it or not, and whether you go to a hospital owned by this group or that group, the amount that anybody pays is drastically different. So we've got so much variability in that pay that it's really hard to get to. That's part of what's contributing to insurance being unaffordable, or it being unaffordable for somebody to just go and pay out of pocket for care. And because of that, then we know that the one place where you can go to get care is an emergency room. So when people have no other option, that's what they go and do. So how do we address those options? I think we need to look at overall, and I'm guessing that you're asking about undocumented in particular, but I think it's part of a bigger thing of how do we make sure that we can afford basic health care for everybody, so that people aren't having to go to the emergency room to get basic health care, right? I was at a Silicon Slopes talk. Mark Cuban was talking, and he's been working on prescription medicine. And he's in a spot where, he's a billionaire, very wealthy guy, and he's trying to compete against pharmaceutical companies to be able to provide cheap drugs to people. And he can only do generic drugs because he doesn't have enough market share to do name brand drugs, because of the effective monopoly that we have at the national level on prescription drugs. And when somebody like Mark Cuban says, I cannot compete, then something is wrong with our overall medical system. And his main recommendations were to break up the trust of the big three insurance companies, and to address the pharmaceutical benefit managers, the middlemen in the healthcare industry. That those are the main things that are contributing to our costs at a high level. I think the other things that can help with that are being able to provide, and where does this fit nationally versus statewide? I think statewide what we can do is provide maybe some sandbox areas for people to be able to experiment with other ways of doing health insurance, so that we're not requiring small businesses to go and become health insurance experts in order to be able to provide affordable health insurance to their employees. Instead, let's find a way that we can pool that so that your health insurance is not tied to your job, but you have access to it all the time. That'll unlock all sorts of flexibility for both employers and employees to work part-time, to be able to get their needs met, to pay more directly into employee salary. So I think we need to look at that from the national level of breaking up those trusts, and from a state level of helping our businesses be able to come up with alternative solutions to employer-tied health insurance.
Okay, but
I'm gonna go check on the door really quick, but let's do this and I'll go check on that.
all right, but to me that doesn't answer the question about those who can't get insurance because they're not documented, and that is a big chunk of the. Well, like I've got pretty good insurance, but I had to pay through my teeth. I felt like for my daughter's stay in the emergency room. Then she was in the hospital for 4 days, and it seems to me like a big chunk of what I'm paying for the ER was to pay for these people who can't get insurance because they're not documented, who want an aspirin. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. And I think if we look at, Obamacare, when that was instituted, and, everyone's rates were going to go down and everyone was going to have insurance. Well, it seems like everything has just doubled. It seems the price you're paying in insurance now is what you were already paying to just go to the doctor without insurance beforehand. And so one of the things that I think we need to look at is the fact that these hospitals aren't paying taxes, and yet, they're getting a tax break, so that's costing taxpayers money to make that up somewhere else. But then they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in charitable care, which then they also have to make up from, the citizens here. And so I would like hospitals to have to start reporting how much charitable care they're giving, and maybe showing that in the same segments that they check everyone else. Why not look at gender? Why not look at citizenship or legal status? Why not look at, the different things that they always ask all of us every time we go to the doctor? And they have all this information, but I think it would help us make some better decisions if we knew how much money was getting paid towards that. And I agree, there's a difference between doing no harm or having to serve every single person who walks through your door. And, I think our liability issues that they like to raise, if you come in with a cold, you come in with the earache. I know I've gone to the hospital or the ER, the Instacare with my kids, and had to wait 5 to 7 hours to get them to actually get looked at. And I think one way to get away from some of this is to start going towards more direct pay. Like I know we are all having to pay into insurance, but if we start increasing the competition by not just going to the same two hospitals who own everything in Utah, you know, is that going to disperse out that money and make them have to compete better? You know, because we're getting charged for the facilities, we're getting paid for the physician, every single different kind of physician you see, and that's not what we used to see before we had insurance. But we've made it too easy, and we've bloated their bureaucracy on all the billing to keep up with, and that has increased our costs like crazy. So
Exactly. Well, and the direct pay too is a key part of that is getting transparent prices, so that, you know, instead of having to be with a good enough insurance that can negotiate a good enough price with that particular hospital, that we actually have fair prices for people. So
I would love to look into if there's anything we can do at the state, and I don't know if there is, but it would be interesting to see if we could even curtail that. I mean, it's the same thing for everyone we pay on Medicaid and anyway, because, you know, when they're not spending their own money and they can just go somewhere. Like I know when I had all my pregnancies, I would see many people who were going to all the high-risk doctors who were, you know, a lot of Medicaid recipients, and, you know, you don't have to show proof of citizenship for a lot of that when you get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, we've got places like People's Health Clinic as well that can provide care that for uninsured people. So I think
Fifth Street
finding
in Salt Lake, too.
finding ways to make it easy for those sorts of clinics to be able to show up and do their work and help people find them, so that it's not our emergency rooms that are providing that care, but that we can provide those.
It seems to me that the emergency room should be able to quickly triage a person and say, okay, you should go to this free clinic versus us handling you.
Yeah.
But they're not allowed to do that right
Not
now.
allowed and not incentivized either, because I know they pay you, or they charge you per hour that you're sitting in a bed. And so if they bring you in, hey, yeah, we'll come have a doctor look at you. Well, 2 hours later, when they finally show up and your kid's been sitting on a bed, this happened to me. They're like, we'll just get you in, come sit down, and then we'll get a doctor in. And it took hours. And then I realized that they had charged us for their hours while they were just sitting there and no one had even come seen us. And so I would really like to look at that as well. It's a racket for sure. It's not right, because we're forced to do it, you know.
I think on this topic here, where you're talking where you were talking previously about the construction stuff, I think one of the biggest factors that ties both of those together, though, is lobbyists and the influence that they're putting on that.
Absolutely.
So a unique perspective I feel here. I've got a type 1 diabetic child that was diagnosed almost 10 years ago now. And I've kept her to this point. She's 18 now, so now I no longer have that control, but I went through that without insurance. I've opted not to have insurance because on top of the premiums, they meddle in your day-to-day care so much that it creates other problems when you're dealing with a chronic illness of that nature, where this medication that works very well for you, we no longer pay for it. Here's the one we're going to give you. Anyway, so.
Well, and I think, you know, there's a difference. People used to get catastrophic insurance. Yeah. If something happened that you couldn't take care of, then you would have this insurance. But somehow it's gone to even just annual doctor's visits and paying for, you know, vaccines, which, you know, if that's how they're getting money, of course they're going to want you to take even more things. And so I just think the whole situation has gone out of whack, and you're right. It's all about the money.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of what I found too, is that we removed the individual that's getting care from having a vested interest in advocating for themselves at the doctor's office of where was pricing.
Yeah.
Where most people, I don't know if it's an unwillingness to deal with a perceived conflict at the billing side of things, or feeling like they're out of control in that. But I think helping incentivize those people in being in that role, and I don't know how the state would play a role in getting there. But be interested to hear any ideas you might have about that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to look into for sure. I know I've heard President Trump talk about the insurance companies. So it'll be interesting to see if they're going to try to go up against them, and see what they would do. Do you want to go to Jeremiah's question?
Yeah, let's do that. So Jeremiah asked, how do you feel about teachers sharing their political views in the classroom? Is there anything to look forward to help keep this in check moving forward? Should they remain neutral with our children? Do you want to go?
Yeah, I can. I just always feel like I'm the last one who was just talking, so I don't know if I should go again. I absolutely don't think that teachers should be sharing their political views in the classroom. They're there to teach English, and they're there to teach math, and they're there to teach, history, and I don't think that pushing agendas is something that teachers should be doing. We saw, teachers trying to advocate for their kids to ditch school to go join protests, and I think that's irresponsible and a lack of trust that they're breaking on the parent side, because I'm not sending my kid to school to go get indoctrinated into someone else's political views, and I think they need to learn the base of what our country and our values were founded on first, and also focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic. And there's a lot of ideas now that there's like, well, we need to teach them all these different things and talk about all this different stuff. But those were all conversations that were happening in college in the past. You would have this foundation and build upon it, focus on the fundamentals. And then you would go to college where you can, discuss more theoretical ideas. But it seems now we don't want to have any specific values and principles that we teach our kids. But if we want to talk about why America was founded or why Utah became a state the way it did, we need to talk about why the people came to this country the way they did, and what they believed, and what they were hoping for and wanting to build this country on. I mean, the fact that we are the oldest constitution and government in the world right now is incredible. But that is an inheritance that we have gotten from people that came before us. And if we don't understand why and how they built that, then we can't pass that on. And it is our duty, I believe, to pass it on to the next generation. And so making sure that we understand the fundamental liberties that we've been blessed with. If we look at the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and it talks about our rights coming from God, how often do we see now people thinking that our rights come from government? And is it because they're not being taught in school that we believe that all of these rights come from God? And I think that's an important thing. If you want to look back to England and the Magna Carta, and when King John's subjects forced him to sign that they had rights, and he wasn't a divine ruler, that they actually had rights, that they knew that they were guaranteed. Those are the same rights that the English came to America. The Pilgrims were also citing, and the Founding Fathers saying, no, we have individual responsibility, and we get to be able to decide for ourselves. And so I think that is an important topic that the kids need to understand. I know I've worked on this myself with different legislation to make sure that we understand the context and beliefs that our founding fathers had when they founded our government, because we see so much in opposition to that today, and our kids have no foundation to really compare what that means when they see other things coming in. It's, oh yeah, that sounds good, but what really is the long-term effects of that? And if our founding fathers already looked at that and rejected it, why did they? And our kids are not getting that in school today.
I think to build on that, it's not just the political views, but we need to make sure that our teachers are being neutral with religious views as well. It can be very easy for anybody, and it's tricky because we don't want people to come in and have to check their identity at the door. And so, yeah, when you know when somebody's in a position of authority, the kids are going to listen to what they're saying a little bit more, right? So there's a difference between like wearing a cross and then sharing what your religious views are in the class, right? So how do we make those spaces where people can show up, where teachers can show up as themselves without providing those sorts of biases that would sway our kids one way or the other. And it's interesting because one of the keys that's really important in our classroom is that there's space for multiple beliefs, that we're not going in and when we talk about political views, that we're not going in and rewriting history from a political standpoint either, and expressing our current political perspective on what we think history was or should have been in order to sway how we do that. And so, one of the things when you talk about free speech is, what's the thing that combats free speech? And the thing is more speech. So when it comes to things like political views, religious views in the classroom, what's important is that our kids get to see that there's a number of different beliefs, a number of different views. Let them understand how that has shaped us. Let them go in and, age appropriate, of course, dig into the material, look at how different people in our country, with all these different religious views, all these different political views, how do we come together to form this country? How do we come together to maintain it, to improve upon it, to continue to work towards a more perfect union, right? It's got to take that exploration of all those views without the teacher taking a stance, which is a really fine line to walk, right? But I think it's really important that we continue to encourage that we don't shy away from topics, but that we really let our kids get in and learn and understand.
So, obviously we all believe in religious freedom, and people can believe whatever they want, but I think we need to also not shy away from the fact that the people who came here to start America were religious, and it was founded on Christian values and biblical principles. One of the very first law books that was ever written in America had all the laws written out, and it had lines to direct Bible verses that they were based off of. And I think that's incredible. I looked it up the other day and it was really cool. In fact, I was just in DC the last few days, and I went to the Jefferson Memorial, and I took a picture of one of the quotes that are on the walls. And it says, "God who gave us life, gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God?" And I think that that's the perfect summation of what I'm saying, is we need to be able to teach that our founding fathers believed that. And so whether someone decides that they want to believe in the same religion or not that our founding fathers did, or have the same religious views, we can't shy away from the fact that God and providence, divine providence, was talked about as the reason for founding this country, and that our rights come from God and not from man, like so many other governments across the world would have people believe for thousands of years. And so when we see those infringed upon, it's not that government's kind of taking back some of their own rights, but they're taking our rights away that we are guaranteed because they're inalienable. Those are all the questions in the comment box right now. Do you have one? Okay.
I got to go to a water meeting.
Okay.
Speaking of water, years ago, they was pumping water from the Great Salt Lake out into the desert. Now them pumps are rusting and there's no water. I'm unaware of any legislation that's going to help restore Great Salt Lake. Do you know of any?
So we've passed in the legislature like 33 different bills affecting the Great Salt Lake. When you're talking about in the 80s when we were pumping the water out, everyone was afraid of the brine shrimp and that the salinity of the lake was going to tip and it wasn't going to be salty enough. And now it's too salty because it's drying too much. So we actually did pass legislation in a special session to make sure that we could move the berm so we could keep a certain depth of the water, because there's not a whole lot we can do when there's no water coming in. Right. And so I think even if you look at filling every single reservoir that feeds into the Salt Lake, and let's say we raise that and put it all in, that would evaporate in 3 months. I don't think that is a wise use of our water to waste our sweet water to turn it salty. So I think in some ways you just got to live with the way that things are. And, I believe in conservation, that's fine. But I think many of us have been being told, hey, we need to conserve water. We need to conserve water. But where do we see that going when we also see development that demands a lot of water too? And I think agriculture has been vilified. But most of that water finds its way downstream after it goes through. And so coming against agriculture, I don't think is what really is going to help with this. So what about you, Kris?
So the headwaters of the Provo, the Weber, and the Bear River all start in Summit County in the Uinta Mountains, and then make their way down to the Great Salt Lake, and then they come back right in the snow when we have snow, and it gets going. So we've got a vested interest up here in this district in particular of seeing not just the start of that water, but as it winds to our counties and then makes its way to the Great Salt Lake and then comes back from an economic standpoint. I think that we can learn a lot of lessons from the Bear Lake Compact and how they approached that up in Rich County. They got stakeholders together. They got the power guys. They got the, for electricity. They got the ag folks. They got conservationists. They got tourism industry. It even had to go across state since the lake goes across state. They have people, from Idaho participating as well. They got all the stakeholders together and they came up with lake levels and actions that they were going to take based on the lake levels to help ensure that Bear Lake stayed healthy for everybody's needs. They understood that everybody working together helps keep that lake healthy and working for everybody. Everybody benefits from that. I think we need to take that same approach with the Great Salt Lake. To your point, it doesn't work to vilify one particular group or whatever. We all play a role, and I think it's important, when we're looking at things like meeting people's need for housing and water and development, that we're making sure that we have that water availability before we're building houses and that we have plans for that. But I think setting a lake level, I think listening to people and not just taking one side of it, but really recognizing that we all have a vested interest in their state of having a healthy lake. So let's work together to get it done right and work.
To me, sometimes we can easily overreact over what the climate is doing. For example, the winter of 78, 79 has a lot of parallels to this winter. And so much so that people were saying, put bricks in your toilet tanks and stuff, because back then the toilets weren't nearly as efficient as they are now. But then it was only 5 or 6 years later that the Great Salt Lake was flooding. So I think that 5, 10 years from now, we may see an opposite problem. It cycles through. That's what weather does.
I agree. I think everything in nature is cyclical. And, I think sometimes it's easy for people to get hung up on a cause. And, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do anything about it. I mean, if there are things we can do, like moving the berm, that's great. But at the end of the day, even if we make guidelines for how high we want the lake, can we really do anything about that? That means we're taking water away from somewhere else. And is that the wisest use, like I said earlier, to turn it salty and also to expand the surface level so that it evaporates faster? I don't think that is what we need to do. Now, if there's ideas, that's great. It'll be interesting to see if we even, if we get that money from the federal government they're talking about. But even with $1 billion, like, what are we going to do unless we build a pipeline to, the east and they give us some of the water they don't want, So I think just sometimes some of these ideas can just kind of whip people up and they're like, what are you doing about the lake? What are you doing about the lake? Well, we've passed 33 different bills to try to help the lake, and yet we're still in this situation. Like, there's only so much man can do.
Yeah, let's just get a pipeline from the Pacific.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks so much for coming. All right, do we have more questions from online? Bruce says, how do you think we ensure that our response to this water issue is responsive and not reactionary? I think that's a good question because it's, especially when we get in a cyclical, we're dealing with the water cycle and the ebbs and flows and all that. It can be really easy to just constantly be behind the curve and reacting to, oh, this is how it is. And then we end up in these spots where we build things and then we don't need them anymore. So I think we need to not just take a short-term view of things, but make sure that we're taking a long-term view and planning things out and being able to, ride the cycles So I grew up in eastern Wyoming, and oil and gas country and coal mining country, and that's a cyclical nature. That's not, water cycle, nature cycle, but it was a cyclical ebb and flow of our economy, and the ways to ride those out are to know that those things are going to be changing over time, and to plan to make sure you don't overbuild when you've got the money, and to make sure you don't underbuild when you don't have things and you don't keep them forward. So when it comes to our water, we need to do the same thing, right? We need to make sure that we're not building our developments up based on our best case scenarios for when we're flush with water, and we need to make sure that we don't panic when we don't have water for a year or two and shut everything down. But we need to find ways to be able to ride through those ups and downs and take the long-term view and make sure that the stuff that we are doing is not going to contribute to long-term demise. So if we take all the water or too much water out of the system, then we do end up in a spot where the lake dries up, where we get into trouble. We can see those cycles in other, we can learn the lessons from other saltwater lakes around the world where things have dried up and the system is completely shut down. And so what we need to do is look for those kinds of things. What do we need to have in place to keep us from getting to that situation while managing the ups and downs in between?
And Bruce, one of the things I would say is, like I was saying, there's always legislation about water in the Great Salt Lake. And one of the things we have is a water commission. And this is where they spend all their time brainstorming, looking at things, working on things. And every single bill that someone writes goes through this committee too, to say, have you already thought about this? What would this actually look like? Can you forecast? So we have a lot of people working on this subject. One of the other things we're looking at right now at the state level and working with Farm Bureau is looking at a way to maybe buy water from ranchers. Let's say they're leaving a field 1 year and not growing on it. Right now, water is kind of like a use it or lose it, like everything in state government budgeting. And so that always incentivizes people to use all their water, even if they're not going to, right? So can we buy that and have them lease it to us for a season and stick that down into the lake? And so that's kind of like a win-win for the ranchers, and then also for the lake advocates as well. And so there are ideas like that we are pursuing and looking at. And so we just have lots of that to work through. We have different ideas. I mean, we saw different organizations donate their water shares last year to the Great Salt Lake in perpetuity. So there's definitely movement on this. I know we hear about it in the media a lot, and everything is very reactionary in the media, but this is not a new conversation, and this is something that is being talked about seriously about, okay, what can we actually do so that we don't have kind of the whiplash going back and forth of like different bills being passed that sound great, but like aren't really good in the long term. And so that's definitely something we're looking at.
And I think at the state level, it doesn't always have to be about passing bills. It can be using the state to help convene people to work together on things. Some of those can be recommending best practices for our farmers and ranchers, for whether that's transitioning to other crops, or whether that's including methods around having a variety of crops or other sorts of water-wise soil management types of efforts. Can we find ways, as we identify those practices that work well in particular areas of our states, to make it easy for ranchers to switch into those more water-wise methods in ways that don't impact them too much financially? So how can we support them as a community if that's our goal, is to help them use less water? Let's make it easy for them to do and not more expensive and a hard thing for them to do. Similarly, we can look at developments. When we have a bunch of parking lot space and asphalt, we don't have water absorbing into our system as much. So then we end up with a lot more evaporation in urban areas. Can we look at best practices when we're talking about our urban design to help water flow through the Wasatch Front areas and get to the lake better, more efficiently? So I think those kinds of, the state can provide resources to help implement those best practices and help share them where appropriate.
And I'd say that that's happening. I mean, I've gone to conservation districts and they have, this is how much water flushes down the drain, or, if you conserve 5 gallons a day, this is what it would look like. I think there's a lot of that going. I think just like the world we live in, with Instagram and, people just get outraged and want something done right now, but don't actually know what's actually being done. So I think a lot of this, the best practices have been being researched and by our universities, especially USU, for, decades now. And so I think it's there. I just think people want a different outcome than that's what is realistic.
We have a comment. It's already reactionary on the water issue. It resembles the climate change issue. Are we looking at spending for another manufactured crisis? Water will always be an issue in the desert.
Amen.
Just a comment.
Yeah. I guess there's a question in there about, are we looking at spending for another manufactured crisis? I think that's part of where you got to take the short-term view and the long-term view. One season isn't enough to make long-term decisions on, but as part of a long-term plan, if there's, hey, we recognize that this is how we're going to manage things, and I think we end up in a better place.
So if there's pre-made decisions like what they did in with the Bear Lake, so that there's a tiered response. So normally nothing happens, but if something happens like a bad drought like now, what can we do? Are you talking about ideas like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Are temporary, that don't hit us forever?
Exactly.
'Cause I'd be worried about a law that we had to live now and then had to keep living it every year when we got water again.
I agree. I mean, I even thought that with people who donated their water shares in perpetuity to the Great Salt Lake. I'm like, well, that feels short-sighted to me. It's different than if you just want to, donate them year by year. But like everything we see, even 50-year, 100-year cycles, I don't like making decisions like that, but I would say every water agency has gone through this and looked at the different things. Now, one thing that I would be really interested in is looking at a way to build more reservoirs in Utah so we can upgrade that infrastructure. And that would be something that I think would be worth spending on. Some of this, I think, is just, feel good stuff to people that I don't agree with, and I usually vote no against. If you want to go look at my voting record, I don't think a lot of what is being proposed is actually going to help do anything but makes people feel better. So yeah, definitely spending money on infrastructure that will help us retain water for the years that we actually need it and letting it flow on the years we don't.
Yeah, the last reservoir, big reservoir that was built in Utah was Jordanelle, and nothing's been done since then. And I think we could have. So I agree there.
Yeah, thanks.
So there's no questions on there. I have a question directed toward you, Kris. A couple days ago when we spoke briefly on the phone, I gave you a heads up on it. So I think a lot of people that I've talked to would like to know why you are a Republican now.
That's a great question. So we talked about this a little bit on the phone, right? I have a complicated relationship with party politics in general, because I think our parties have outsized dominance in our political system. So I've been unaffiliated for years and years and years and years. When I first moved to Utah, I registered as a Republican to try out the caucus system to learn about it. And then I went unaffiliated again after that. And then when it came time to run, so I'm a mathematician by background and by training, and the way that our general elections are run, mathematically, it drives to a two-party system, because when you've got, whoever gets the most votes wins, then that naturally drives to a two-party system. And so if you've got a third party in there, you end up worrying about vote splitting and spoiler effects and all of that kind of stuff. So when I was looking to run that first time against Kara, and we were at a town hall actually here in Morgan. She was like, "You've got a lot of really good ideas. You should think about running." And I told her I wasn't sure if I wanted to run against her or not. She said, yeah, jump in the race. And part of the reason that I did that was because that enabled the chance to have conversations. We went and we had some town halls together, and we talked about how we have a lot more in common than we have different. And that's been a really important thing to me. So again, I come from a problem-solving background. I went and I took a detour into communications and conflict resolution and things like that, because I see our conflicts, especially our conflicts between our two parties, get in the way of us being able to solve problems. And so I want to be in a spot where we're working together, where we're bringing together our best ideas, and we're focused on the issues and finding those solutions. And we need all of our perspectives together to do that. So in my ideal world, I would win the nomination from both parties, because that would show that I am in a spot where I can represent people in my district, regardless of party, at the legislature, and really be focused on what is that commonality? What are those things that we agree on, that we need to work on? Let's put those into practice first. But the system doesn't allow for that, the way that it works. So I started out, I joined the Democratic Party. I told them, when I said that I was thinking about running and thinking about joining the party, I said, look, I'm an independent person. I'm not coming in here. I'm not going to just vote on what the party says that I should vote on. I'm voting based on what I think my constituents want in my district, and that's how I run. I need to keep that independence. And that's the same thing that I tell donors. That's the same thing that I tell when I get endorsements from groups. It's like, I appreciate the support. I appreciate the donations, but that and the endorsements, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to vote the way that you want me to vote. I'm going to vote the way that my constituents want me to vote. So last January, after Kara resigned, I switched and joined the Republican Party because I had fundamental issues with that process. I wish that she had resigned before the election so that the Republican Party could choose a candidate to run against me in the general election. I had 10,000 people vote for me in that general election, and then our choice of representative came down to 60 people, which I think was unfair to all those people that had voted, and 15,000 had voted for Kara. So, we went from 25,000 people to 60 people, and to me, it's really important in a representative democracy in our republic that people get to vote for their representation. So then why did I stay as a Republican would be probably your next question, right? And to me, there's a number of reasons. One is I think it's healthy to have these kinds of conversations that we're having today. I think if I can, by running, help you be a better representative, then that's good for everybody in the district. So I think sometimes when we have non-competitive races and nobody's challenging the incumbent or having conversations, it's really easy for people into power to just get comfortable and sit back and stop listening. And so for me, it was really important. How do we continue to have the conversations? How do we have healthy competition? And by staying as Republican, I get maybe the chance to earn the Republican nomination as well. And so then at least at 2 different times I've had a nomination from each party. So that sort of fulfills that goal. I also recognize that our district is primarily Republican. So for me to be able to represent something, I need to be able to speak to those conservative values at the state legislature. So for me as a representative, it's less about what my personal preferences are, and it's more, I need to set those in the backseat and really be listening to everybody in the district and making sure that I'm representing those first, regardless of what I believe. So that's all.
Okay. Any comments on that?
Yeah, please feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an accounting math person too, but that doesn't change that, I stand up for the values and beliefs that I have, and I don't change just because it's expedient. I was an opinion writer at the U when I went to school there, and I was a minority voice there, and yet I was happy to stand up for what I believed. And so I believe in representative government, which means you can't take a poll of everyone every time you take a vote. We vote on over 1,000 different pieces of legislation, and there's no time to sit and put a poll out to your constituents. So how do they know how I'm going to vote? Well, I tell them what I believe, and then I vote that way. And so I think many of you know that I'm happy to support our district. I mean, I had the most no votes against my party the first session. We did have someone last session, which was awesome, and she voted almost against every single bill. Out of a different principle, but so I didn't have that again. But I don't feel the pressure to change what I believe. But I know that if you choose me again, then you know where I stand on things. I tell you where I stand, and I'm not wishy-washy. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't listen when people reach out. People reach out all the time and tell me how different pieces of legislation affect them, and I look at that and I look at the constitutionality of it. And that's really important to me. But at the end of the day, I believe in representational government and not direct democracy. And so the values that I put out there are the values you're going to get.
I think that makes sense. And I just want to add, to clarify, that who I am and my values have not changed in this process. Which party I've been affiliated with has changed, but who I am has not changed. I continue to run on. I continue to use the same candidate materials that I've used, the same logo, the same message. I continue to run on the same things. I'm still the same person, right? And that's part of the problem, is no one party necessarily fits all of us exactly, right? And I don't define myself by my party. I define myself, my key core commitment is to the Constitution first, to the people in this district second. So I had the same conversation in January with Ari when I was talking to him about staying in the Republican Party that I had when I joined the Democratic Party. I said, being in this party, I'm staying in the party, but I am maintaining my independence and my willingness to vote for and represent the people in the district. And it's not about pushing through what the party says. It's about representing what the people in the district need.
Okay, so let's say, right, left, center. So I'm like here. Where are you in that line?
That's a good question. So, and I don't want to be, I would say I'm probably primarily centrist. I go libertarian, which is, I don't know where that is on that line, I guess.
Slightly left.
Yeah, it depends on where you're at. I am a big believer in privacy and in individuality. So, right, I don't think the government should be making decisions about what happens to our personal bodies. That's not the purview of the government. I think we need to protect people's privacy. So I really had issues with the voter bill that was passed this year that took all of the private records, and mine is one of the private records that made them public. I actually, whenever I request the voter information as a candidate, I can request the private and the withheld. I always explicitly request just the public, because if I'm keeping my record private, I don't think it's fair for me to then get access to people who have marked the records private.
Oh, yeah.
So,
When I got that letter this week from the state on that, I was rather appalled at not what information could be given away, but who it could be given to. I was really surprised.
Yeah, I was a withheld voter as well. I would say that that law that let it be withheld is about 7 years old. And a lot of the reason to do that is because we can't, if we're talking about elections and secure elections, we can't verify who people are if their information is withheld. So how do we know who's voting in our elections? And so this is really aligning with federal law right now. We had kind of gone away from that 7 years ago, but it was for domestic violence, or people had protective orders, or certain reasons why they would be able to have their information withheld, but then everyone was asking for it, and that wasn't necessarily what the law was intended for. So we're trying to bring that back. And I would love to have my information not out there as well, but I will say, if we have a right of association in our different organizations, how can you have people joining your organization that you don't know who they are? If you're in charge of them, how can the Republican Party know who's joining just because they check a Republican check mark, and they don't know who they are? And if we're trying to get out there and message to the constituents what we're working on, how can you talk to those people if 40%, at least you have no idea who's in your organization. And so we can't have 40% of people voting and not know who they are. Now, it doesn't show what you're voting. It just shows if you voted. But yeah, a lot of our information, and I don't like it either, is given to third parties to look at our voter rolls, and that is something that we have tried to pull back, and it has been killed a few times in different bodies of the legislature. And so I would definitely support making sure that we maintain our own rolls at the state, and we don't give access to them to third parties. But I would say
That's how I feel.
yeah.
I mean, I think instead of running this bill and passing this bill, I think it could have been adjusted by giving people who had marked their records private an ability to opt in to sharing that information with the political parties. That's actually one of the reasons why I liked having my record marked private, is I didn't want that information. I didn't want my information shared, right? And so I think that it's important that our government is listening to those needs and respecting that, and not feeling entitled to our data, and that political parties, nonprofit, I've seen some nonprofits and some advocacy organizations that were speaking in favor of the bill as well. And there's sort of an entitlement to be able to access that, whereas I think it's much more important to be able to opt into who contacts me and who has access to my information.
See, I can understand the state, and I can understand the political parties having that information. But the third parties,
I agree.
that scares me, because how do we guarantee that they're going to keep that information safe? Because there's very little information there that's missing to start doing fraud.
I agree. And I think you'll probably see some movement with that. I would like to go back to the political party issue, though. I'm running as a Republican, and if you read the Republican platform, that's what Republicans agree is like the ideas and tenets that bind us together. And so, those are the same things that I advocate for. And so I think it's important that if you want the nomination of the Republican Party, you should be espousing those ideas.
I like hearing the difference of opinion.
All right.
It's good to hear. And I want to speak to that. So there's a number of things in the party platform that I agree with. When I signed up, I made a point of pointing out the clause that talks about corruption and holding our elected officials accountable, and the mission of the Republican Party. Because I think too often it's easy for candidates, and I'm not saying that you've done this, but I'm saying that there are other candidates in the state that have done this, who will come in and who will just say whatever they need to say to get elected, and then not actually follow what's in that platform once they're there, specifically when it comes to things around corruption, when it comes to accountability, to whether they're paying attention to stuff. So I get, and we can go into some of the MIDA stuff in the public infrastructure districts and things like that, and some of that kind of self-dealing, right? And again, I want to be very careful. I'm not talking about you here, but this is a problem that happens at the state level, and I think it's important to bring attention to, if we're not paying attention to the ethics of our elected officials, then, and holding them to being ethical, then it doesn't matter what they say about those other things, because they're free to ignore them as they choose to. So we need to hold people first to being ethical, and hold them to a higher standard because they're public officials first, and then we can look at those policy things from there. And so I wanted to raise, part of the reason that I carved out those two things in particular is I wanted to bring attention to, I think when we don't do that, it ends up hurting people in the party because they're not represented by officials in good faith.
Well, and I think that's why we have elections every 2 years. So you vote those people out that are clearly self-dealing and aren't there for the right reasons. And I wish more, often that would actually happen. But I think that's up to the local delegates, and also, if they're signature gatherers, then the populace at large needs to be paying attention to what the representative is doing. And that means that we should have a lot more engagement in our political process. And I wish more people would. I was telling Kris earlier today, when when I try to talk to people, even some of my own friends, I'll be like, hey, you know, like this is going on, or do you want to talk politics? Or like, oh no, I'm not political. I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, I'm making decisions that affect your life and you don't want to engage with that. And I think that that is something that is lacking in our education in schools, is that not only do they not understand how to engage with their government, but that they don't want to, and they don't understand why they need to. And so it's very important to me that we teach our kids why it's so important to be informed. If you think about the early days of the founding of the country, the dinner conversations that every family was having was about politics, was about their representatives, was about taxes, all of these major things that we fought a war over and are now, you know, put to the side for whatever Instagram person is famous at the moment and all the drama in their personal life. And I think that that is because they're not learning about true civics in school. And if you look at why public school was started in the first place, it was for an educated populace who knew about the system of government that they had and to be civically minded.
All right. Jeremiah asks, what would each of you say is your driver for being in politics? What would be your pet project or take most of your time in office looking forward?
You can go ahead.
So I am running to be the representative that I wish that I could vote for. So I've been really, for a long time, I was kind of frustrated and cynical about politics. When I started participating in the tax referendum effort in 2019 and gathering signatures, it was really inspiring to me because we had people from all across the state, rural, urban. We had Democrats and Republicans working together. We had old folk, young people. We had across all sorts of different economic groups all working together to say, hey, what just happened in the state legislature is not okay. We need better tax policy than this. And we all worked together and we achieved a really challenging milestone of gathering enough signatures in a very short period of time. To me, that was inspiring for what an engaged political process could look like, where we've got people talking with each other, working with their neighbors, working with elected officials to get things done. And so I'm interested in how do we get to that space where we increase our civic engagement, where we've got people all contributing, we've got elected officials listening, we've got people sharing, and we're focused on together what are the problems? Let's address those problems and let's talk about the ideas and let's have good, solid, passionate competition about ideas without going in and attacking people for or dismissing their ideas outright. If we've got a good, solid solution to solve a problem, but the wrong team came up with that idea, so we're not going to do it, is just shooting ourselves in the foot. So I'm really interested in how do we get to a place where we can work together, where we can let our ideas and thoughts compete. And we come up with the best solutions for as many of us as possible.
Okay. Yeah. So I got involved because I have a family, I have kids, and I'm always looking to see what their future is going to look like and wanting to have the best future possible for them. When I see what's going on in the schools, or I see different tax policy happening, I see the state overreach in a state that says that we believe in limited government. I don't necessarily see that happening in many places, especially when we're talking about preliminary incorporations. And, that's one of the first bills that I drafted was to focus on that and to push back against just the natural abuse of power that happens. As you get more power, you want more power. And as you have access to people's money, you want more of it, especially if it's easy to get. And I don't agree with that. And so I'm pushing back against that at the state. And I think you can see from the bills that that's definitely what I'm focused on. And I would say, for the most part, taxes are a huge part of my platform that I look at. It's my background as a tax accountant, working on what we can do with, let's control the spending, but also let's try to reduce taxes. In 2023, we collected $126 million more than we were forecasting. In an ideal world, I would love a mechanism that would refund that automatically back to the voters rather than just keeping it in the general fund. And so having ideas on how to do that, but at the end of the day, it's also math. You have to have enough people voted in who are wanting to fight for those same things. And so we need everyone's support across Utah to vote for people who will support things like that and not support just the individual enrichment of their companies and their families and their business industries. So I've always just had a passion for our country. My role model growing up was George Washington, probably because I was born on his birthday, and so I always felt this like affinity with him. And so I studied the founding of our country from a young age and just fell in love with the American dream. And I think we see more and more that is slipping away because people are counting on government to give them that and not wanting to work for it the same way that everyone else in the past has. And so my main focus is getting government out of the way, letting us live the way we want. This is the most incredible country in the world that has contributed to the most successful and prosperous nation that has ever been in the entire world, especially when we're talking about the middle class and what that does. But the more and more we move to the left and do socialist practices, our middle class is declining. And so I believe we need to protect the ability to start businesses, to be able to earn money and not have it be taxed at intolerable levels. If you look at the percent that our colonists' ancestors were being taxed, and when they were yelling about it, I mean, it was 2%, 3%, 4%. And they thought that was just unconscionable. And so here we are, where some people in our country are being taxed over 50% of their income. I don't think that's right. I don't think that paying unrealized gains on our houses before we sell them is right. I think that politicians for too long have gotten used to being able to increase taxes without a fight, and I think we need to push back. We need to fight and say, no, you don't get my money just because you want to grow your budget. You need to be responsible like the rest of us who are tightening our belts. And I definitely push for that at the state. There were a lot of times when people wanted to increase different things at the budget this year, and some of them sounded great, but if it was going to increase taxes, then they voted against it. So that's one of the things that I really focus on is this going to increase taxes or fees? Because we all know fees are just taxes by another name. And that's something that I just don't agree with.
Bruce asks, what steps do you think are necessary to make sure every election in Utah is secure, accurate, and that people can fully trust the results? Do you want to start?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in showing your ID. Like, in fact, so I was just in Washington, D.C. this week. Like I said earlier, the White House had invited the Utah legislature out there to go meet with some of the administration. And while we were there, Representative Kennedy did a tour for some of us. And he was talking about when they were voting on the SAVE Act and whether or not we wanted to make sure that we had voter ID. We had a bunch of people in the House of Representatives vote no against it, but the way they had to vote was showing their own ID to prove who they were. And so, I mean, we show ID for alcohol, we show ID for all sorts of things, and I think it is ridiculous to use the argument that somehow it's racist, that certain people can't figure out how to get a license or an ID of some sort. So if we had ID, then that would be great. And there's a lot of really fun stuff that's coming up, and I can tell you about it in a minute, but I don't know if Kris wants to say what he thinks.
Sure. So Utah already runs elections really, really, really well. Is there always room for improvement? Yeah, sure. But it's really important to understand that we've done it well. We've been doing mail-in voting for years and years and years, and we've done well. We've innovated on that. What we can do to make it secure, more accurate, fully trust the results. One of the things that I highly encourage you to go do is go to your county clerk's office and watch as they do because they'll give you tours, help you see the process, understand that, ask their questions. Our county clerks are really like unsung heroes in our state. They care deeply about making sure that our elections are secure and accurate. And so I think we need to continue to support and encourage good quality, high quality citizens to go in and become county clerks and run that. It's just amazing what they do. Continuing to be able to provide ways to communicate the audits out and see how that's working and learn how the process is working and see that, it will be part of that. I think sometimes some politicians like to score points by building mistrust in things and mischaracterizing stuff in order to get fear up there, to increase the fear that we have in elections, and so they blow things out of proportion. So I think it's really important that we get good, accurate information about our elections. So we need to go in, we need to ask the questions, talk with your clerk, look at the, I would really encourage that, and look at where are there issues, and let's go in and address those specific issues instead of worrying about do we need to change mail-in voting in Utah because some other state isn't doing it well. I don't think that's the case. We do it really well, and we have 90-some% of our people show up and vote because of that. So that increases our civic engagement. We've got people participating and voting. We need to make sure that we're not making it harder for our voters to vote based on misplaced fear.
So something I would say about that is there's a reason why there's distrust, because we see things happen that shouldn't be happening. We see that some illegals have actually voted. It might not be a huge percent, but do we know when we just have a small audit of things? But the fact that even one was able to do it is too much. I think also I've gone around and talked to different constituents in our district, and I've had someone say, hey, I had 8 ballots show up to my house. We see people who are dead who have been voting, and we don't have processes in place, or we haven't had processes in place to deal with that. And so when people see that happening, there's a good reason why then they would distrust the results as a whole. And so some of the things that I voted to support and things I'm excited to say is that Utah's the only Republican state that has universal mail-in voting. And we've had people talk about how that puts us at risk for fraud. And so some of the things that we've passed in the last 2 years is to make it so that if you want to continue receiving a mail-in ballot, because we've heard from our constituents that they definitely like having that ability, you're going to have to verify who you are to continue getting that ballot past 2028. And when you send it in, you'll have to put in the last 4 of your social or the last 4 of your driver's license. And then also, if you don't want to put it through the mail system, and some of our mail actually goes outside the state before it comes back in, so that custody is an issue. If you want to return it to a ballot box, we have funded to make sure that there will be people at the ballot box who will check your ID when you turn in your ballot. So we're definitely working on making elections secure and making sure we know who is actually voting. And so that has been a huge topic of conversation for the last 2 years that I've been in the legislature. And I've supported every effort to do that, and will continue to support anything that will make our elections more secure, because as we've all seen, trust in our institutions is at an all-time low, and we need to address that fact. And if there are things that are making people mistrust us, we need to be completely transparent and change the things that we need to make sure it's not. So I think this is a major way that we are going about making sure that only the people who are able to vote in our elections actually are the ones voting in our elections.
I think as we do that, it's important to make sure that it remains easy for everybody who's allowed to vote. And so I'm concerned that we will see if we do, and most of what you mentioned is okay, but I think some of it, particularly showing an ID when you drop off your ballot in the ballot box, is going to increase costs drastically. We already have a really solid signature verification method. I think adding the Social Security to that is going to help, or the driver's license number will help address those lingering things. Keeping our voter rolls clean is going to help with that kind of stuff. But if we see our voter participation go from 90% down to 85%, and 5% of people who could vote before now can't vote, we've just disenfranchised part of our population. And is that a cost that we're willing to pay in order to keep the fear of one illegal person from voting? I don't think so. I think we address that through these other methods. But so that's what I'm going to be watching really closely, is to make sure that we're not seeing a decrease in our voter participation due to methods. We need to be able to do both. We need to be able to increase participation and make sure things are secure and accurate.
Well, it'd be interesting to see why that voter participation drops if it does, because maybe they weren't eligible to begin with. But I would say the main thing about a free and secure country is to make sure that you know that the people who are being elected are being legitimately elected. If we look at different countries, the way a lot of people are able to stay in power is because that they don't have free and fair elections. And I think any cost to ensure that our elections are free so that people have trust in our government not only helps the election process, but then also the legitimacy of all the other votes we're taking in the legislature and making as a governor, or, you know, retaining judges. It would help people put their trust that those people are there and they're representing their constituents, and we don't have nefarious things happening. If you look at any country in the world that is developed, I mean, let's just look at the countries in Europe. You know, they don't have people voting that don't show ID. I don't know where it came from that we think that it's okay for anyone who wants to sign up for a driver's license and just attest that they're a citizen without showing that they actually are. I've lived in different countries and I've had to prove who I was many times, and I never was allowed to vote in any of their elections. And so to want to secure our own elections, I don't think is too much to ask, and I'm willing to pay for it. Although I will say, you know, in years past when we didn't have mail-in voting, we had people volunteer to man the ballot boxes, and that worked out fine. So I don't see it being a huge cost. And, you know, if you're able to go get your license so you can drive, or so you can buy alcohol, or so you can buy cigarettes, or whatever it is you want, so you can sign up for Social Security, or you can sign up for anything else that you have to show your ID for, voting is the least of those things.
And we do show our IDs when we register to vote. So it's important to know that that is part of that process of verifying that we're registered, we show our IDs. So it's important to know that I'm not talking about not showing IDs, but I'm talking about
proof of citizenship when you get your driver's license.
okay.
Yeah, there was just a box and you didn't have to show certification for that.
Right. Well, and that's because we as a country have a long-standing, proud tradition of trusting people and trusting our neighbors and showing up and all that kind of stuff. The concern, I think, is that people might abuse that trust. So how do we address that?
Trust but verify.
Mm-hmm.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify.
I love it. That's great.
And it's tricky, right?
Because
Because
was that Reagan?
I can't remember who it was. All right. Does anyone have any other questions? It was Ronald Reagan. Good job.
that's nice.
Regarding the nuclear disarmament with USSR. Good job.
He was my hero.
He's awesome.
Any other? Yeah.
Thank you. We appreciate you guys coming.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's nice to be able to dig in a little bit deeper with this stuff. So thank you all for giving the time, taking the time to do this and to ask the questions and to continue to vet and dig into things. This is good stuff.
Yep, you're welcome. We hope you have a good night.